Secretary Pete Hegseth has said that President Trump has flipped the script in Venezuela. He says decades of US involvement cost blood without economic return, but strategic action now gives access to wealth and resources without American casualties. Let's listen in to the US Secretary of Defense.
It's the exact opposite. I mean, we spent decades and decades and purchased in blood and got nothing economically in return. And President Trump flips the script. He says through strategic action, we can ensure that we have access to additional wealth and resources, enabling a country to unleash that without having to spend American blood.
Eric joins us once again. Eric, is the US openly admitting here this was about economic gain? Of course, Donald Trump last night said that US oil companies will come in, rebuild infrastructure inside Venezuela. It's unclear how that's going to happen as of yet. Is the US openly admitting this?
Yeah, but the arguments made are, of course, incredibly interesting because there is nothing of the liberal imperialist doctrine of the past where the United States claimed that it wanted to make democracy everywhere. That was also dangerous, but at least there was an ideology of helping the world as they saw it. Now the argument is that the United States shall totally dominate one part of the world, the Americas. There's an argument about drugs, which doesn't stand up to scrutiny. And it's an argument about this invasion will benefit the American taxpayers and workers because they will get easier access to cheap oil from Venezuela. This, of course, doesn't stand up to any scrutiny from any international law, and a flat-out dangerous argument if other nations starting to follow the same.
And Eric, how do you think the broader scape of Latin America will interpret this morning? Fear, anger?
Let's remember that we are just in the very, very early days of this. Trump says that the United States will run Venezuela. Look, Venezuela is a population of 30 million. It's very deeply split along ethnic and political and class lines. It's a huge territory. How can the United States control that just by a threat from outside? Unless they put tens of thousands of soldiers on the ground, they cannot control it. And even if they do that, they will, of course, end up with making the targets for resistance, as happened in, say, Afghanistan or Iraq, where American occupation became the rallying cry for those who were opposed and ended up with bloodshed. So it's very unclear how this will develop.
Beyond its borders to protect strategic and security objectives. From the Monroe Doctrine in the 1800s to Cold War containment and the post-9/11 war on terror, US policy has consistently involved active engagement abroad. Latin America has been a key focus. The US intervened in Cuba in 1898, establishing long-term influence, and it also played a role in Panama's separation in 1903 and later invaded Panama in 1989. In Guatemala, a CIA-backed operation ousted a democratically elected government in 1954, and moreover, US troops were also deployed to the Dominican Republic in 1965, while during the 1980s, Washington supported the Contras in Nicaragua and invaded Grenada in 1983. Outside the Latin American region, the United States has frequently relied on proxy wars. It supported partner forces in Afghanistan during the 1980s and also in Angola and in Iraq. More recently, the US has been providing extensive military support to Ukraine. The latest US operation in Venezuela fits into this longer pattern of US intervention, and it comes after recent military actions in Yemen, strikes on Iranian facilities, and expanded security engagement in Europe and in the Indo-Pacific. Seen together, these cases shows how the US interventions, whether direct or indirect, have been a reoccurring feature of American foreign policy. Eric joins us once again. Does the capture of Maduro mark continuity in the US intervention, in US interventionism, or is this something different entirely?
I think it's an element of both. I mean, it's for sure a continuity in the sense that the United States has involved itself in any number of violent operations in the Americas. You mentioned a number of them. You can add El Salvador and Guatemala, where the United States supported extreme right-wing governments which massacred people large scale, or military coups in Argentina and Chile. They were not started by the United States, but they were firmly supported by the United States. So there is a long history of bad actions in the United States in Latin America. And of course, Latin Americans remember. They are not dumb, they remember this very well. So if the United States goes back to this way of behavior, there will be an enormous resistance. To me, it's very hard to understand how American, US people cannot put themselves in the case of others. I mean, look, if China declared that it wanted to dominate the United States, would Americans be happy with that? Well, and we all know the answer to that. I mean, they will fight as one man in Kansas and Nebraska to avoid Chinese dominance. But if that's the case, how can they believe that US dominance will be popular in Latin America? There they speak Spanish, not English. They have a different culture, different upbringing, different history. And for any other reason, they don't want to be dominated by the US. So this is a policy which can never work, and it can only create numerous new problems and conflicts.
Eric, does intervention here, does it historically bring stability? Is there anything that we can compare this to which has brought success to the region? Any especially in Latin America? What's your analysis?
There were two historical reasons why the United States involved in any number of coups and regime change operations and wars in Latin America. One was to defeat the Soviet Union and communism, and they supported basically in every nation those who were opposed to the Soviet Union. Whatever the color, if they were Democrats, they were happy to support Democrats. If they were brutal military dictators, they were happy to support them. They supported everyone opposed to the Soviet Union. And the other was, of course, to defend American commercial interests, like the United Fruits, which supplied the bananas to the United States, or oil companies or more. But at least since 1945, the main motivation for the United States was to counter communism. Well, that's gone. There's no communism in any Latin American nation. So there is that motivation is gone. The United States should look into how they
Okay, apologies there. We seem to have had some network issues. I want to thank my guest, Erik Solheim, for coming on and joining us. It's a pleasure to have had you on News X World. We now move on to our next story, and the United States' strike on Venezuela. Analysts suggest that the move